if the Crown Prosecution Service are not going to charge these assailants, then we at Reform UK, we will launch a private criminal prosecution against these assailants. So you saw the footage there of that shocking assault on police officers way back on the 23rd of July, some 11 weeks ago. Now today, we are sending to the Home Secretary a letter signed by all 5 of the Reform UK MPs setting out our real concerns, because this was a brutal, vicious, violent assault on those police officers, who must have wondered what on earth was happening. It was so violent that a number of the officers were floored, at least one officer had a nose broken, and frankly, as Nigel just touched on, the officers showed great restraint by only using their tasers as opposed to something more serious. In many airports around the world, it would have been a case of weapons first, ask questions later. Those officers should be applauded for how they conducted themselves. 11 weeks later, the assailants have still not been charged. Just think about that. I mean, we've got the video evidence. What more evidence can there be? And yet we've seen actually a clear example where just 2 weeks after this incident, when regrettably other police officers were assaulted, they were arrested, charged, convicted and jailed in very, very short order, a matter of days. And that's what actually I think the public want: prompt, fair justice. So you have to ask yourself, why, Home Secretary, is this situation different? Why are these assailants being treated differently to other assailants, other assaults on police officers? It's the same offence. There is no difference. Now, what actually happened, of course, was that when the footage came out, it actually came out through social media a day later, and it showed the back end of the incident. It didn't show the whole footage. So what was allowed to permeate through the country was that this was police brutality, that this was racism, that this was appalling, and a terrible sense of misinformation. We've heard a lot about misinformation. Misinformation was allowed to permeate through society and through the country. It wasn't until the Saturday, 4 days later, that the whole of that footage emerged through a leak. Not through official sources, but through a leak. And then everybody suddenly realised, as I realised when I saw the first footage, because I looked at the fact that 2 tasers had been deployed, that actually this was a vicious, violent assault. Just put yourselves in the mind of, if you'd seen the whole of that footage day one, within a couple of hours of the incident, you would have said, vicious assault, the police officers did well conducting themselves and apprehending the assailants. Now, this is what we've learnt from our sources. It turns out that someone very senior in the Greater Manchester Police, possibly higher, but we think right at the top of Greater Manchester Police, made a deliberate decision to withhold the full footage shortly after the incident. I repeat, my question is, why was that footage withheld? If it had been released, we would not be where we are. That is absolutely extraordinary. So you've got a situation where the IOPC, the Independent Office for Police Conduct, launched their investigation into the conduct of the officers before the Crown Prosecution Service launched their investigation into the assailants. Here we are 11 weeks later, and this investigation by the IOPC is ongoing, still going on. In fact, extraordinarily, they're now investigating who leaked the footage. That if the officials had released that footage immediately, we wouldn't be where we are. I understand over 500 people had access to that footage, and whoever did leak that footage, frankly, has done a great service to the national public interest. But no, the IPC, they think they should investigate it. So what's really going on here? That's the question we have to ask. We have a genuine concern that actually the CPS are withholding charging these assailants until the IOPC have concluded their investigation. And if the IOPC find any fault in the conduct of the officers, then that will give the CPS reason not to charge the assailants. Just think about that. Just think about the effect that might have on the morale of serving police officers up and down the country, thinking, hang on, I carry out my duty, but I may be left in it, I may be dumped on by the IOPC, and I won't be backed up. That leads to a complete collapse of morale amongst serving police officers. And if they're worried about that, then the impact is they won't actually carry out their duties and their functions in the way that we, tens of millions of British people, would like them to do so, because they're too afraid of the consequences. That is a very bad place for law and order and justice to be in our country. This is not acceptable. It's not acceptable to us at Reform UK, but much more importantly, it's not acceptable to tens of millions of decent, law-abiding British citizens. So we are therefore serving notice today in this letter to the Home Secretary that if the Crown Prosecution Service are not going to charge these assailants, then we at Reform UK, we will launch a private criminal prosecution against these assailants. We've taken legal advice. I have a top-quality legal team on standby, and that is what we will do. And we will crowdfund it, and I'm very confident that we will raise considerable sums in order to carry out such a prosecution, and in order to provide the confidence that our serving police officers up and down the country want in their duty. It is completely unacceptable for the CPS not to charge these people. Now, it's been suggested to me that if we carry out this action and we launch a private criminal prosecution, that the CPS may then adopt it and carry it on themselves and then discontinue it. And so I just serve notice here today. Again, that would be completely, utterly unacceptable to tens of millions of British people. This situation is untenable. It's 11 weeks on. We're left with a situation where we genuinely ask the question, has a degree of misconduct or misfeasance gone on by senior officials at the IOPC, at the Greater Manchester Police, and by the CPS? This is not a good place for law and order to be in the United Kingdom. It is a very bad thing if tens of millions of British people think that we have two-tier policing and two-tier justice. That is the contents of this letter to the Home Secretary. We look forward to her reply and her statement on this issue, but the British people want action, we want answers, we want equal, fair, prompt justice.